Okay, our next unit is called the camera, and we're going to learn everything that we can find out about the camera. And we're going to start off with the basics and what is photography. If you look at it literally, photography, you're looking at the words light and drawing. Photography, meaning you're actually drawing with light and you're capturing it on a piece of paper and you're making it permanent. The precursor to the camera was actually the camera obscura, and it was developed quite a while ago, and in the 1700s it was used very often with painters because they can start to trace from reality. They actually were able to either build a dark room or build a dark box and expose light through an opening or a lens, and then they're able to trace the outside or whatever it was they're trying to paint. So they would trace these and bring them back into their studio and then actually finish the painting in the studio. The video on the bottom left shows you how you can turn your whole bedroom into a camera obscura by darkening out the entire bedroom and then just having one single pin hole in your window, and you can actually project the outside world in the inside of your bedroom. On the top right, you can watch this video, which will show you the history of the camera obscura. The first photographer I want us to learn about is Joseph Niepce. He's a French photographer, and he's credited with exposing and making permanent the very first photograph in 1826. We're coming up on the 200-year anniversary. This is 2024. So it took 8 hours to expose this first photograph, and you can see it's a view from his apartment window, and it's the first permanent picture. And there's a little bit of video information about the history of his work. The second photographer who really popularized photography and made it accessible to a lot of people is that his process is called the daguerreotype, and his name is Louis Daguerre. From 1839, he made permanent images created on copper plates and then coated with a chemical process with silver. And below you can watch the process and how they are made. This photograph is one of his most famous photographs on the right. It's actually a really, I think it's a Parisian neighborhood, and there's a lot of activity going on, but you can't see any of the activity because it's such a long exposure. However, you can see the man getting his shoe shined on the bottom left corner, and the reason you can see it is because he's standing still for so long. On the bottom left is a picture of Daguerre, and you can see that he has really extreme detail in his photographic process. This process required you to keep it behind glass because when you expose it to oxygen, it would actually degrade the picture. But you can see it does have very fine quality. You can even see the texture in his hand. The large format camera is a camera that you would probably only use in a studio, but the great thing about a large format camera is it has a very large negative or a camera sensor so that you can get very fine details. You can't even see the grain when you blow these pictures up really large. They're cumbersome to move around, so they're not very popular to use outside of the studio. Some cameras, like you see on the right, those two cameras are field cameras. You could actually mount those on a tripod and take them outside, but you would need a truck and some materials to help you get it carried to where you need it to go. The medium format camera is the go-between between large format and small format camera. And the medium format camera you would use in a studio for like advertisement, product, models, anything like that. Anything that you want to blow up big, maybe for advertising on a billboard, you would be using a camera like this. This is still handheld, but it's a lot bulkier than the types of cameras that we're using. The camera on the left probably goes for about $2,000 if you were to buy it used. And it's this film, but if you were to buy it with a digital sensor in the back, you're talking about $30,000 to be able to read all that information. The size of the negatives are about 6x7 or 6x6, so they're about the size of your hand. The 35mm camera is a flexible film roll, and you can see in this video, you can watch how you load a camera, and you can get about up to 25 to 36 pictures on one of these rolls of film. This is actually the same kind of film that was used in filmmaking, and you would have really large rolls and you could watch an entire film on this. But this is popularized up until the 2000s. This was the main way that people were recording pictures, and they usually sent the negatives out to a lab to get them developed and printed because most people did not have a darkroom at home. Speaking of darkroom photography is where I learned photography, and you can see these videos actually show you how it works. You expose your pictures in your camera, and then you develop them with chemicals, and you can do it at home or you can do it in a shared darkroom space at a facility. I suggest if you go to college to try to take a darkroom photography class because you're going to really enjoy the experience. But watch these videos so you can see a little bit more about it. The digital SLR is the camera that we're going to be using in the classroom. They're big and bulky, but and you can use several different kinds of lenses. You can detach the lens and put on a different one, just like you would see sports photographers on the side of the field with really long lenses. You can switch out any kind of lens you need for these cameras. The advantages of this is that when you look through that viewfinder, you're going to see exactly what the camera sees. Other cameras use an approximation, but this is the actual image that you're going to see. Inside of it, the reason these cameras sound so loud, you hear the ch-ch sound, is because the mirror is going up and flipping up and down, and that's what's creating that large sound. So the next type of camera we're going to learn about is the mirrorless camera. This is new to photography, and a lot of people are starting to prefer the mirrorless camera. The reason is it's not as big and bulky as the digital SLR, and it doesn't have that mirror, so it's not going to make that large sound when you open and close the shutter. It's lightweight. It can still give you the same quality, but as of right now, some of these cameras can be more expensive than a digital SLR. It is lighter weight, so it makes it a little bit more difficult to handle if you're putting larger lenses on it, but it's something new, and we do have some of these for our Raider Media class. George Eastman was a inventor of the flexible film roll, which made photography available to everyone. So finally, anyone who had access to a small camera like this Brownie on the bottom right here could take photography or make photographs, but then they had to send out their rolls of film to be developed by a professional lab, and then the pictures would come back to them. So for a long while, we're talking from the 1920s up until probably the 2000s, people were using 35 millimeter film and getting this processed by a lab because it was too expensive for everybody to have their own lab in their own houses. Oh, and this is a fun video on Kodachrome, but take a look at that one. Okay, Steve Sasson was the first digital camera inventor from Eastman Kodak in 1975. This camera weighed 8 pounds, but it only had 0.01 megapixels. To think about, your cameras today have 20 megapixels. This guy created one with 0.01. The image was recorded on a cassette tape, and it took 23 minutes to process it, and the original picture was in black and white. The point-and-shoot camera, we have a few of these in the classroom. They're kind of on their being phased out because people have smartphones now, but it serves similar purpose to what smartphones are, something really quick you can get out and shoot and not have to worry about any of the manual settings. Some of them do have manual settings, but for a lot of people, this was just something when they were traveling, they were going to be able to take pictures. The good thing about these cameras is they do have optical zoom. So as you can see, the lens in this can go in and out, which means it's an optical zoom rather than a digital zoom. The shutter on the camera is the device that opens and closes and allows light into the camera. So you can watch this video to watch how the shutter mechanism works. And the cool thing about shutter is that you can set how long the shutter is open. And each setting that you put it at will give a different effect to your photography. Now, how do you release the shutter? You use it by clicking this button on the right hand side of the camera with your index finger. It's the large button on our cameras, I believe they're silver. When you press it, it actually starts the process to allow the light into the camera to take your photograph. It's called a shutter release. The aperture actually exists inside of the lens. And so when you are buying a lens, you're actually buying the aperture with it. And the better the aperture, the more light you're allowed to get into your camera, which makes the lenses more expensive. So there's a little video about how aperture works. You should take a minute or so to look at this video. But the aperture will help you create different effects on the blurriness of your picture. The viewfinder is something I want to encourage you all to use. Your cameras, the cameras on your smartphone, you usually hold them in front of you and you take the picture. The disadvantage to that is you see the whole world around the camera, whereas in this situation when you're using a viewfinder, you put your eye up to it, it encases you inside the photograph, so all you see is the photograph and the edges of the photograph. You're not seeing everything else. So it makes your composition a lot stronger if you're using the viewfinder. In the cameras that we have, the viewfinder shows exactly what the photograph is going to look like. Now the camera lenses can create different effects as well. You can see the difference between the 35 millimeter and the 85 millimeter on the bottom left over here. Notice how her chin has different proportions than the 85 millimeter. And click on some of these videos so you can see the difference of how the lens can affect the way your picture looks. But it can also help you zoom in, and you can zoom in using a zoom lens, or you could have a fixed lens where you only purchased like a 35, a 50, or an 85 millimeter lens, but you have to keep changing it out. We have a zoom lens. We have a larger zoom lens for bringing in like sports action closer, and we also have the one that's standard on our cameras. So on your lens, you're going to have the option for a manual focus or an autofocus. This exists on the lens, and you'll just be able to turn the switch to MF or AF. AF is probably where you'll keep it most of the time, but there's going to be times where MF is going to be better because sometimes your camera does not know what it needs to focus on. So you have to tell it. We're going to go through really quickly all the different modes. The auto mode you're not going to use. I just want you to be able to identify it. But this pretty much turns your camera into a point-and-shoot camera. The program mode is very similar to the auto mode. However, you can still make choices on your ISO and your flash setting. The shutter priority mode means you prioritize your shutter speed and then the camera chooses everything else for you. The opposite of that is the aperture priority mode, where you choose the aperture and then the camera chooses everything else. This is a landscape mode that's an automatic setting, portrait mode for automatic setting, and macro mode for automatic setting. Sports as well. That makes it really fast shutter speed so that you can capture action. And this is night mode. It will flash and it will also extend the shutter to allow light in from behind the subject. And then the bulb setting, some cameras have it on the outside, but most of them, when you do your shutter all the way down to the slow shutter speed, it will turn into bulb setting. Bulb setting allows you to open the shutter for as long as you want it to. And these last two videos you can watch on your own time. This is like before photography, like how did photography come to be, and then digital photography,